On October 23rd, the basketball world woke up in disbelief as news broke that Chauncey Billups was allegedly entangled in a mafia-linked gambling scandal. When asked to react, Shaq said this:
"I know everybody that's at play, and I don't like to sit up here and be hypocritical about certain things."
Now, that probably means one thing: he knew. And in this video, I'll show you new footage of NBA players begging Chauncey Billups not to leak their names. The shock heard around the league. The basketball world woke up to absolute chaos on October 23, 2025, a day that will forever be etched in NBA history as one of the darkest moments the league has ever witnessed. As fans across the nation prepared to celebrate the tip-off of the new season, federal authorities were orchestrating what can only be described as a seismic takedown that would send shockwaves reverberating through every corner of professional basketball and beyond. This wasn't just another story about athletes making poor decisions. This was something far more sinister, far more calculated, and far more devastating than anyone could have possibly imagined. The headlines exploded across every sports network, every social media platform, and every news outlet in America. Portland Trail Blazers coach Chauncey Billups and Miami Heat guard Terry Rozier had been arrested by the FBI. But this wasn't just a simple arrest. This was the culmination of a multi-year federal investigation that would expose an underground network so elaborate, so technologically sophisticated, and so deeply connected to organized crime that it would make Hollywood scripts seem tame by comparison.
Good morning. Today we are here in New York to announce a historic arrest across a wide-sweeping criminal enterprise that envelops both the NBA and La Casa Nostra. The men and women up here standing with me represent a small portion of the leadership team that brought profound justice in an era that needed it more than any.
When FBI Director Kash Patel himself stepped up to the podium alongside multiple federal agencies, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York, the NYPD, Homeland Security Investigations, and the Waterfront Commission, everyone knew this was unprecedented. The presence of the FBI Director at a press conference is reserved for only the most significant cases, and as he began to speak, the full magnitude of what had been uncovered became terrifyingly clear. The investigation revealed not one, but two massive criminal operations that had been running parallel to each other, sometimes intersecting, sometimes operating independently, but always with the same goal: to defraud victims, manipulate outcomes, and rake in tens of millions of dollars through illegal means. The first operation, dubbed Operation Nothing But Bet, focused specifically on insider sports betting within the NBA, a scheme where players and coaches allegedly leaked confidential information about player availability, injuries, and game plans to betting rings who would then place massive wagers on prop bets with guaranteed outcomes. The second operation, called Operation Royal Flush, was even more elaborate and chilling in its execution. This was a nationwide network of rigged poker games backed by four major mafia families: the Bonanno, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese crime families, all working together in what prosecutors described as one of the most sophisticated gambling frauds ever uncovered in the United States.
The FBI led a coordinated takedown across 11 states to arrest over 30 individuals today responsible for this case, which is very much ongoing. Not only did we crack into the fraud that these perpetrators committed on the grand stage of the NBA, but we also entered and executed a system of justice against La Casa Nostra, to include the Bonanno, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese crime families.
The numbers alone were staggering. Over 30 individuals arrested across 11 states. Charges ranging from wire fraud to money laundering, from extortion to armed robbery. And at the center of it all were names that every basketball fan knew. Names that had been synonymous with excellence, championship pedigree, and the kind of success that young players dreamed about achieving. Chauncey Billups, Mr. Big Shot himself, a five-time NBA All-Star, the 2004 NBA Finals MVP who had led the Detroit Pistons to a championship victory, a member of the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame, inducted just 1 year prior in 2024. And as of that fateful morning in October, the head coach of the Portland Trail Blazers, a position he had held with apparent respect and admiration since 2021. How could someone with such an illustrious career, someone who had achieved everything basketball had to offer, find themselves handcuffed and facing federal charges that could result in decades behind bars? Terry Rozier, at just 31 years old, old, was in the prime of his career. The Miami Heat guard was playing on a massive contract, $96.3 million over 4 years, and had established himself as a legitimate scoring threat in the league. He had everything to lose, and yet, according to federal prosecutors, he had allegedly thrown it all away for what amounted to pocket change compared to his annual salary. The allegations were specific and damning. Rozier had allegedly provided inside information about his own performance, specifically texting associates that he would exit games early with fake injuries so that bettors could cash in on under-prop bets on his statistics. The most glaring example that would later go viral across social media was a March 23, 2023 game between the Charlotte Hornets and the New Orleans Pelicans. On that night, Rozier allegedly sent a text to his childhood friend Deniro Laster, telling him that he planned to leave the game early, citing a shoulder injury. True to his word, Rozier played just 9 minutes and 34 seconds before exiting the game. The betting syndicate, armed with this insider knowledge, placed over $200,000 in wagers on underbets for Rozier's points, rebounds, and assists. When Rozier left the court, those bets hit, and the group collected massive payouts. According to court documents, the proceeds were later delivered to Rozier's own home, where the group counted out the cash. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn, and where the rumors and speculation that have been swirling across social media platforms need to be addressed head-on. In the days following the arrests, social media exploded with claims about new footage showing NBA players supposedly begging Chauncey Billups not to leak their names in connection with the gambling scandal. These claims spread like wildfire, with fans sharing posts, creating memes, and speculating wildly about which players might be involved, which teams might be implicated, and whether the entire league was somehow compromised. Let's be absolutely clear about this. After exhaustive research across news sources, federal indictments, court filings, and social media platforms, there is no credible evidence whatsoever of any such footage existing. No video has been released. No audio recordings have been made public. No players have been shown begging anyone for anything. This appears to be a case of internet speculation run amok, fed by the shocking nature of the arrests and the natural human tendency to fill in gaps with dramatic narratives. What is real, however, and what has been documented in painstaking detail by federal investigators is far more disturbing than any sensationalized rumor could be. The investigation revealed that this wasn't just about a few bad actors making poor decisions. This was about a systematically organized criminal enterprise that had been operating for years, recruiting influential figures from the NBA to serve as what prosecutors called face cards, celebrities whose names and reputations would lure wealthy victims into high-stakes poker games that were rigged from the very beginning.
And the fraud is mind-boggling. It's not hundreds of dollars. It's not thousands of dollars. It's not tens of thousands of dollars. It's not even millions of dollars. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars in fraud and theft and robbery across a multi-year investigation.
According to the indictments unsealed on October 23rd, the poker scheme alone defrauded victims of at least $715 million, but the true figure is likely much higher as investigations continue and more victims come forward. One individual alone reportedly lost $1.8 million in these rigged games. These weren't backroom card games in smoky basements. These were high-stakes operations taking place in some of the most exclusive locations across America: the Hamptons in New York, luxury suites in Las Vegas, upscale venues in Miami, and penthouses in Manhattan. The victims believed they were sitting down at legitimate poker tables with NBA legends and current players. They thought they were participating in competitive games where skill and luck would determine the winners. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have known, was that every single person at the table except them was in on the scam. The dealer was part of it. The other players were part of it. Even the so-called face cards, the famous athletes whose presence gave the games an air of legitimacy, were allegedly part of the conspiracy. Billups, according to federal prosecutors, participated in at least one game in 2019 that defrauded victims out of $50,000, with the proceeds split among the cheaters, dealers, and organizers. But his alleged role went beyond just showing up to lend credibility. Court documents suggest that he may have also been involved in the NBA betting scheme as co-conspirator 8, described as an Oregon resident, a former player who played from 1997 to 2014, and a coach since 2021. All of these details match Billups perfectly. If these allegations are true, he may have tipped off bettors that the Trailblazers would rest star players before a crucial game against the Chicago Bulls on March 24, 2023, resulting in a 28-point blowout loss and successful bets for the syndicate. Following the money and the mob. When federal prosecutors began peeling back the layers of this criminal enterprise, what they discovered was a sophisticated operation that had been years in the making, a carefully constructed network that combined cutting-edge technology, old-school organized crime enforcement tactics, and the glittering allure of celebrity to create what can only be described as the perfect storm of fraud. The poker scheme, which prosecutors say began operating as early as 2019, required an intricate web of participants, each playing a specific role in ensuring that wealthy victims, whom the syndicate referred to as fish, would be systematically stripped of their money without ever realizing they were swimming in a tank full of sharks. These weren't street-level hustlers running three-card Monte on a corner. These were organized criminals with access to technology that most people didn't even know existed, backed by some of the most powerful and feared crime families in American history.
The games in the New York area were backed by the Bonanno, Gambino, and Genovese crime families of La Cosa Nostra.
The involvement of 4 different La Cosa Nostra families working together, Bonanno, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese, is extraordinarily rare and speaks to the massive profits at stake. Traditionally, these families operate in their own territories with their own rackets, occasionally coming into conflict over turf or business disputes. For all 4 to collaborate on a single operation suggests that the money flowing through these poker games was substantial enough that it made sense to pool resources, share technology, and split the proceeds rather than risk internal warfare. Federal authorities revealed that at least 13 defendants in the poker case have direct ties to these organized crime families, including capos, captains, and soldiers made members of the mafia who have taken blood oaths of loyalty. These weren't associates or hangers-on. These were actual members of La Cosa Nostra, the Italian-American mafia, directly involved in running rigged poker games and using NBA players and coaches as bait. The role that Chauncey Billups allegedly played as a face card was absolutely critical to the operation's success. Think about it from the perspective of a wealthy businessman, a tech entrepreneur, or a hedge fund manager who has money to burn and loves the idea of sitting across a poker table from an NBA Hall of Famer. When you get an invitation to a private, high-stakes game where Chauncey Billups will be playing, your guard naturally comes down. You think to yourself, this must be legitimate. Why would a Hall of Fame coach risk his reputation on some shady operation? That's exactly what the organizers were counting on. Billups wasn't the only NBA figure allegedly recruited for this purpose. Damon DJ Jones, a former NBA player and assistant coach who had stints with teams including the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Miami Heat, was also arrested and charged in both the poker scheme and the sports betting case. Jones allegedly served as a bridge between the 2 operations, using his connections in the league to gather inside information about player injuries and game plans, while also showing up to poker games to lend credibility. The sophistication of the cheating. Technology cannot be overstated. Let's break down exactly how this worked, because it's genuinely mind-blowing. Federal agents seized custom-modified shuffling machines, specifically Deckmate 2 units that had been purchased off the shelf and then taken to tech specialists who installed hidden cameras and wireless transmitters inside them. When cards were shuffled and dealt, these modified machines would read the order of the entire deck using RFID chips or barcode scanning technology. This information would be transmitted in real time to someone sitting off-site, sometimes in a different room, sometimes in a different building entirely, who could see exactly which cards each player at the table had been dealt. This person, often referred to as the quarterback of the operation, would then communicate this information back to conspirators at the table using encrypted cell phones, earpieces, or coded signals. But the technology went even further. X-ray tables were installed in some locations, allowing conspirators wearing special glasses or using hidden cameras to literally see through the cards lying face down on the table. Imagine being a victim in this game, holding what you think is a winning hand, completely unaware that everyone else at the table can see your cards as clearly as if they were face up. Marked decks were used in conjunction with special contact lenses that made invisible markings visible to the wearers. Poker chip trays were fitted with hidden cameras that would capture images of cards as they were dealt or discarded. Every angle was covered, every possible edge was exploited. There was virtually no scenario in which a fish could win, and if by some miracle they did start to get lucky, the game would simply be stopped, or the victim would be encouraged to play one more hand until the conspirators could recoup their temporary losses. And what happened when victims couldn't pay their debts? This is where the mafia connection became particularly dark and dangerous. The organized crime families didn't just provide backing and legitimacy to the operation, they also provided enforcement. When someone owed money and couldn't pay, they were subjected to the kind of pressure tactics that the mafia has perfected over decades: threats, intimidation, violence, and in at least one case documented in the indictments, armed robbery. Federal prosecutors revealed that one victim who refused to pay was tracked down, and conspirators used threats of violence to collect the debt. In another instance, someone was robbed at gunpoint specifically to obtain a rigged shuffling machine that the conspirators needed back to avoid it being discovered and potentially examined by authorities. This wasn't white-collar crime where everyone shakes hands and moves on. This was organized crime in its rawest form, where debts were enforced through fear and violence. Now, let's turn our attention to the sports betting side of the operation, because this is where the implications for the NBA become even more troubling. The betting scheme, which federal prosecutors say operated from December 2022 through March 2024, involved the manipulation of at least 7 NBA games through the use of insider information about player availability, injuries, and game strategies that hadn't yet been made public. The business model was actually quite simple, even if the execution was elaborate. Find someone with inside access to NBA teams, a player, a coach, a trainer, someone in the organization who knows what's really happening before the public does, and convince them to share that information with bettors who can then place massive wagers with guaranteed outcomes. Terry Rozier's alleged involvement provides the clearest example of how this worked. On March 23, 2023, while he was still playing for the Charlotte Hornets, Rozier allegedly sent a text message to his childhood friend DeNiro Laster, informing him that he planned to leave the game early, citing a shoulder injury. This wasn't a legitimate injury that Rozier had sustained during the game. According to prosecutors, this was a pre-planned exit designed specifically to enable betting manipulation. Armed with this insider knowledge, Laster and others in the betting syndicate placed over $200,000 in wagers on under-prop bets for Rozier's statistics, betting that he would score fewer than a certain number of points, grab fewer than a certain number of rebounds, record fewer than a certain number of assists. When Rozier left the game after just 9 minutes and 34 seconds of playing time, having scored only a handful of points, all of those under-bets hit, generating tens of thousands of dollars in profit for the conspirators. The video footage of Rozier's exit from that game has now gone viral on social media, with millions of views as people analyze his body language, the timing of his departure, and whether there were any visible signs that he was faking an injury. Sports commentators and fans have pored over every second of footage, looking for clues, trying to determine whether Rozier appeared genuinely hurt or whether his exit was as scripted as prosecutors allege. What makes this particularly damning is that the NBA had actually investigated Rozier for this exact incident back in 2023, after sportsbooks like DraftKings flagged unusual betting patterns around his performance. At the time, the league concluded that they didn't have enough evidence to take action against Rozier, and he was effectively cleared. However, federal investigators with access to subpoena power, wiretaps, text messages, and financial records were able to build a much more comprehensive case than the NBA could with its internal investigation. But Rozier's alleged scheme wasn't an isolated incident. The indictments detail multiple games where insider information was allegedly used to manipulate betting outcomes. Damon Jones, the former player and assistant coach, allegedly sold information about LeBron James's unreported foot injury before a Lakers-Bucks game on February 9, 2023. He allegedly leaked information about Lakers player availability before a game against the Oklahoma City Thunder on January 15, 2024. An unnamed Orlando Magic player allegedly leaked information about the Cleveland Cavaliers before a game in April 2023, allowing bettors to successfully wager on the spread after both teams rested their starters. And then there's the allegation against co-conspirator 8, who many believe to be Chauncey Billups, based on the detailed description in the indictment. This individual allegedly tipped off bettors that the Portland Trail Blazers planned to rest their star players, Damian Lillard, Jusuf Nurkic, Jerami Grant, and Anthony Simons, before their game against the Chicago Bulls on March 24, 2023. The Trail Blazers were blown out by 28 points in that game, and bettors who had been given advance notice were able to cash in on spread bets and under totals, knowing that Portland's best players would be sitting on the bench. The fallout and the future. The immediate aftermath of the October 23rd arrests sent the NBA into crisis mode. Within hours, the league issued a statement emphasizing that they take these allegations with the utmost seriousness and that the integrity of the game remains their top priority. But behind those carefully crafted public relations statements, there was genuine panic rippling through league offices, team front offices, and player associations. Both Chauncey Billups and Terry Rozier were immediately placed on indefinite leave from their respective teams. The Portland Trail Blazers Trailblazers named assistant coach Tiago Splitter as interim head coach, and the Miami Heat announced that Rozier would not play while the legal proceedings unfolded. These weren't just temporary suspensions pending investigation. These were the beginning of what could be permanent separations from the league, depending on how the criminal cases proceed and what evidence ultimately comes to light. The NBA has specific rules that govern player and personnel conduct when it comes to gambling, and they're extraordinarily strict for good reason. Article 35 of the league's constitution gives the commissioner the power to impose discipline for gambling-related offenses, including lifetime bans in severe cases. The precedent here is clear. John Tay Porter, a two-way player for the Toronto Raptors, was banned for life from the NBA in April 2024 after he pleaded guilty to charges related to a similar prop betting scheme where he deliberately underperformed and left games early so that bettors could cash in on under wagers. If Rozier is convicted on the federal charges he faces, wire fraud conspiracy and money laundering conspiracy, he could receive a lifetime ban from the NBA, which would void his contract and save the Miami Heat approximately $26.6 million in future salary obligations. For a player in the prime of his career, this would represent a catastrophic fall from grace, transforming him from a well-compensated professional athlete to a convicted felon banned from ever playing in the league again. Phillips' situation is slightly different because he's a coach rather than a player, but the potential consequences are no less severe. While he technically faces less risk of a lifetime ban compared to players who manipulate games, he could still be fired by the Trailblazers, face suspension under the league's operations manual, and potentially never work in professional basketball again, depending on what evidence emerges from the trial. His reputation, carefully built over a 17-year playing career and subsequent transition to coaching, would be irreparably damaged. The legal consequences both men face are staggering. Federal wire fraud and money laundering charges carry maximum sentences of up to 20 years per count, while first-time offenders rarely receive. Maximum sentences and plea deals often reduce time significantly. We're still talking about the very real possibility of substantial prison time. Prosecutors have made it clear that they view these cases as serious threats to the integrity of professional sports, and they've promised to seek significant penalties to send a message to anyone else who might be tempted to engage in similar conduct.
I know everybody that's at play, and I don't like to sit up here and be hypocritical about certain things.
The reaction from current and former NBA players has been a mixture of shock, disappointment, and anger. On TNT's Inside the NBA show, the panel featuring Shaquille O'Neal, Charles Barkley, and Kenny Smith discussed the scandal in depth. Shaq's comments were particularly powerful and emotional. He admitted to the temptation that gambling can present, saying he had been in situations where he could have made similar mistakes, but emphasized that every player knows the rules and knows the consequences.
We all know the rules, we all know the letter of the law, and it's just unfortunate.
Charles Barkley was more blunt in his assessment, calling the defendants stupid for risking everything they had for relatively small amounts of money compared to their salaries. His point resonated with many fans and observers. Why would someone making $26 million a year like Rozier risk it all to help a friend make $50,000 or $100,000 on prop bets? Why would a Hall of Fame coach with a secure position and a legacy to protect get involved with mafia-backed poker scams?
The reason I'm mad at Kenny is, man, this ain't got nothing to do with damn gambling addiction. This ain't got nothing to do with addiction. These dudes are stupid. Why are they stupid? Under no circumstances can you fix basketball games. Under no circumstances.
Kenny Smith offered a more nuanced perspective, suggesting that gambling addiction could explain some of the seemingly irrational behavior, noting that addiction causes people to make illogical decisions regardless of their financial status. He pointed out that the FBI director had mentioned one victim who lost $1.8 million in the rigged poker games, which means that person had substantial wealth but still got caught up in the addiction cycle. This debate between Barkley and Smith actually highlights a critical question that this entire scandal raises. Is this about greed, stupidity, addiction, or something else entirely? The truth is probably that different participants had different motivations. Some may have been struggling with genuine gambling addictions. Others may have been motivated purely by greed, seeing an opportunity to make easy money. Still others, particularly those with organized crime connections, may have been operating from a place of calculated criminal enterprise, viewing the NBA figures as useful tools to be exploited. The broader implications for the NBA NBA, and professional sports as a whole cannot be overstated. This scandal comes at a time when sports gambling has exploded across America following the 2018 Supreme Court decision that struck down PASPA, the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, opening the floodgates for legalized sports betting in dozens of states. The NBA, along with other major sports leagues, embraced this shift, signing massive partnership deals with companies like DraftKings, FanDuel, and BetMGM. These partnerships have been incredibly lucrative for the league, generating hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue through advertising, sponsorships, and data licensing agreements. But they've also created an environment where the line between legitimate fandom and gambling interest has become increasingly blurred. Broadcasts now regularly feature betting odds, prop bet suggestions, and real-time updates on how games are affecting betting lines. Apps allow fans to place bets from their phones in seconds, making gambling as easy as checking a score. Critics have argued that the NBA and other leagues have effectively invited this kind of scandal by so thoroughly integrating gambling into the fan experience without adequate safeguards. Commissioner Adam Silver has defended the league's approach, noting that the NBA worked to implement monitoring systems and education programs to prevent exactly this kind of manipulation. But clearly, those measures weren't enough to stop a multi-year conspiracy involving players, coaches, organized crime, and sophisticated technology. Looking forward, the NBA faces some difficult decisions about how to proceed. Enhanced injury reporting protocols are likely, requiring teams to disclose player availability earlier and with more detail to reduce the window where insider information provides an advantage. Stricter limits on prop betting, particularly on two-way players or players with minimal minutes, are already being implemented following the Jonte Porter case. Some have called for federal legislation to standardize sports betting regulations across states and provide clearer guidelines for what constitutes illegal manipulation versus legitimate wagering. The investigation is far from over. Federal prosecutors have made it clear that more indictments could be coming, with ongoing probes into potential college basketball connections and other professional sports figures who may have been involved in similar schemes. The FBI has encouraged anyone with information about illegal gambling or game manipulation to come forward, suggesting they believe there are still stones left unturned. That brings us to the end of this story. For more interesting videos like this, click on the cards on your screen.